I ripped the name tag off my chest and held it up in front of 200 wedding guests so everyone could read it. The old lady paying for everything. That's what my own family pinned on me at my granddaughter's wedding. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. Whoever wrote this, I said, come and say it to my face. Nobody moved. My son wouldn't even look at me. And that's the moment I decided I was done being the family bank. What I learned 3 days later, inside a lawyer's office, changed everything because my late husband knew this day would come. If you're watching from somewhere in America right now, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far my story has traveled. Subscribe and stay with me till the end. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 66 years old the day I found out what my family really thought of me. Let me back up because I want you to understand something first. I wasn't a bitter woman. I wasn't looking for a fight. For most of my life, I was the person who smoothed things over. The one who said, it's fine, don't worry about it. The one who paid the check before anyone could reach for their wallet. I thought that was love. I really did. The morning of Sophia's wedding, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and talked to my dead husband. Well, Daniel, I said out loud, our granddaughter's getting married today. Can you believe it? The house didn't answer. It never does. But I like to pretend. I was wearing the navy blue dress. Daniel always said navy was my color. I fixed the necklace at my throat, the one he gave me for our 40th anniversary, and I pressed my palm flat against my chest, like I could feel him standing behind me. You'd be so proud of her, I whispered. She looks just like your mother. 3 years he'd been gone. 3 years, and I still set 2 coffee cups out some mornings before I caught myself. My phone buzzed on the dresser, a text from my son. Thomas, you leaving soon? Caroline wants everyone there by 2. I typed back, on my way, sweetheart. Thomas, great. Don't forget you're covering the bar tab they're going to ask at the door. I stared at that message for a second. Not see you soon. Not can't wait, Mom. Just a reminder about the money. But I brushed it off. I always brushed it off. That was the whole problem, and I didn't even know it yet. The ceremony was at a chapel on the edge of town, and I'll say this much, it was beautiful. Sophia came down that aisle like something out of a magazine, and when I saw my son Thomas walking beside her with his arm crooked and his chin up, I cried. I'm not ashamed of it. I cried like a fool, because for 1 minute, 1 single minute, I forgot about the money. I sat in the second row. Not the first. The first row was Thomas, Caroline, and Caroline's parents, who I'd met exactly twice. I got the second row. I told myself it didn't matter. Grandmothers sit where they sit. After the vows, everybody spilled out onto the chapel steps for photographs, and I stood off to the side waiting to be called in. The photographer, a young man with a ponytail, kept shouting names. Parents of the bride. Let's get parents of the bride. Thomas and Caroline stepped up. Groom's family. They shuffled in. Bridesmaids. I waited. I had my hands folded. I had my best smile ready. Okay, and let's get one big one, everybody who's immediate family. I started to move forward, and Caroline, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, put her hand out. Not rudely, almost gently, like she was doing me a favor. Evelyn, why don't you sit this one out? It's a lot of standing. We'll get you in the next batch. There was no next batch. I want you to understand, I noticed. I noticed every single one of these little cuts, but I'd trained myself for years to explain them away. She's stressed. It's a big day. Don't make it about you, Evelyn. So I stepped back into the shade, and I watched my family take pictures without me, and I told myself it was fine. It was not fine, but I didn't know how to say that yet. The reception was at the Whitfield Grand Ballroom. I know it was the Whitfield because I'm the one who booked it. I'm the one who wrote the deposit check for $11,000 back in March, sitting at my kitchen table, while Caroline hovered over my shoulder, telling me which package to choose. The platinum's really the only one that makes sense, she'd said. The gold doesn't include the chandeliers. So I paid for the chandeliers. I drove myself to the reception. Nobody offered to ride with me. I pulled into the lot, checked my lipstick in the rear view, and walked up to the grand entrance where a line of guests was filing in. There was a table by the door. A young woman in a black vest stood behind it, handing out name tags and pointing people toward their seats. Sweet girl. Couldn't have been more than 20. Name, she asked me, smiling. Evelyn Carter. I'm the grandmother of the bride. She looked down at a little tray of name tags, all of them in this pretty calligraphy, and she picked one up and started to hand it to me. Then she stopped. She looked at it again. Her smile just fell off her face. She said. 1 second, ma'am. Let me find a different one for you. Is something wrong? No, ma'am, I think there's a mistake. Now I've raised a child. I've taught Sunday school. I know when a young person is trying to protect me from something, and it made me want to see it more, not less. Let me see it, honey. Ma'am, I really think I should just, let me see it. She handed it to me, slow, like it might bite. In beautiful, looping, expensive calligraphy, my name tag said, "The old lady paying for everything." I read it 3 times. I thought maybe I was reading it wrong. Maybe it was a cruel trick of the light. But no, those were the words. Somebody had sat down with a nice pen and written that out on purpose and put it on the tray with all the real names. "I'm so sorry," the girl whispered. "I'll fix it right now. I'll write you a new one." But I couldn't stop looking at it. "Who made these?" I asked her. The mother of the bride handled the place cards and the tags, I think. I just hand them out. I swear I didn't. "Caroline made this." The girl didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her face answered for her. And here's the part that hurt the most, and I need you to really hear this. It wasn't the word old. I am old. I've earned every year. It wasn't even really the insult itself. It was the calligraphy. Somebody had taken time. Somebody had thought this was funny enough, clever enough to make it pretty, to laminate it, to set it out on a silver tray at my granddaughter's wedding for the whole family to see. This wasn't a slip of the tongue in a heated moment. This was planned. This was craft. And that's when I heard the whispering. I turned my head, and there were 2 women friends of Caroline's. I recognized them from the bridal shower I paid for, standing a few feet away, with champagne flutes leaning into each other. "Did you see Evelyn's name tag?" one of them said. The other one laughed behind her hand. Caroline thought it'd be hysterical, and honestly, everyone knows she's the family ATM. It's not wrong, the family ATM. I stood there in a ballroom I paid for holding a name tag that called me exactly what they all thought I was, and I felt something crack open inside me. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet crack like ice on a pond in early spring. The girl held out a fresh tag. "Here, ma'am, I wrote you a proper one. Evelyn Carter, grandmother of the bride. I'm really so sorry." I took the new one, and you know what I did with the old one? I put it in my purse. I don't know why in that moment. But something told me to keep it. Some old instinct, like Daniel's voice in the back of my head saying, "Hold on to that, Evelyn. You're going to need it." I almost left. I want to be honest with you. I stood in the doorway of that ballroom with my keys in my hand, and I almost turned around and drove home and never looked back. But then I saw Sophia across the room laughing with her bridesmaids glowing in her white dress, and I thought, no, this is her day. I will not be the woman who caused a scene at her granddaughter's wedding. I'll handle this later. That's what I always told myself. Later. Later never came. I'd been saying later for 3 years. I fixed my new name tag to my dress, straightened my back, and walked into the reception with my chin up. The first person to reach me was Thomas. "Mom, there you are." He had a group of men with him, business friends of his, all in expensive suits. He put his hand on my shoulder and turned me to face them like I was a display. "Everybody, this is my mother. This is the reason we're all standing in this gorgeous room today." He laughed. "She's the one who made all this happen, if you know what I mean." The men chuckled. One of them said, "Well, thank you, Mrs. Carter. Beautiful room." "Thank you," I said. And Thomas, my son, my only child, the boy I stayed up all night with when he had pneumonia at 6 years old, Thomas patted me on the back and said, "Yeah, Mom's been very generous. Very, very generous." The way he said generous, like it was the only word he had for me. Not kind, not loving, not my mother who raised me, just generous, like I was a foundation, a grant, a line item. Caroline drifted over then in a champagne-colored gown that I would later realize she'd also charged to me through the wedding budget. "Evelyn," she said, air-kissing beside my cheek, "don't you look nice? Is that the navy bold choice for a wedding? But it works on you." "Caroline," I said, and I kept my voice very even, "I need to ask you about the name tag." For half a second, just half a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Then it smoothed right over. "The what?" "The name tag, at the door, the one with my name on it." "Oh," she waved her hand. "That, God, don't tell me you're upset about that." "Should I not be?" She laughed. A light, tinkling, dismissive little laugh. "Evelyn, it was a joke. It was for the family table. Everybody's got a funny one. Thomas's says, the guy who married up. Come on, lighten up. It's a wedding." "Does everybody's joke insult them?" "It's not an insult. It's you are helping with everything. It's affectionate." She smiled at me the way you smile at a child who's confused about the rules. Honestly, I thought you'd think it was cute. And there it was. You are helping with everything. Said right to my face like the truth of it was the same thing as an excuse. I looked at her, and I looked at my son standing 3 feet away pretending not to hear, and I made myself smile. Of course, I said. Silly me, because it was Sophia's day, and I would not ruin it. But inside that crack in the ice was spreading. I got through the reception. I want to tell you I sat there in cold fury the whole time, but the truth is more pathetic than that. I helped. When a server told me the caterer needed a signature for the final head count, I signed. When the DJ asked who was authorizing the overtime, they pointed him to me, and I said yes. When Caroline's mother complained the wine was running low, I quietly told the bar manager to open more cases on my tab. I was still doing it, even after the name tag, even after all of it, because I didn't know how to stop. 30 years of being the one who paid doesn't turn off like a light switch. But something else was happening inside me. I was watching. For the first time in years, I was really watching. And once you start watching, you can't stop seeing. I saw how Caroline's parents were seated at the head table, and I was at table 9 near the kitchen doors, next to a cousin of the groom's I'd never met. I saw Thomas make a toast, a lovely toast actually, thanking everyone who made this beautiful celebration possible. And he named the wedding planner and Caroline's parents for their love and support. And he never once said my name, not once. And I'd written a check for the whole thing. I saw my grandson, Noah Sophia's younger brother, sitting off to the side of the family table, and he wasn't laughing. He kept looking over at me at table 9 with an expression I couldn't read. Sad, guilty, something. And I saw near the end of the night Caroline pull Thomas aside by the coat check, and I happened to be walking to the ladies' room, and I heard just a piece of it. After the honeymoon, that's when we bring up the house, Caroline was saying low. She's soft right now, sentimental, perfect time. The house. My house. I stopped walking. I stood there behind a column with my heart going 100 miles an hour, and I waited to hear more, but they moved away, and the DJ turned the music up, and it was gone. But I'd heard it. That's when we bring up the house. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and I laid the name tag out in front of me. The real one. The ugly one. The old lady paying for everything. And I did something I'd been avoiding for 3 years. I got out my checkbook registers, the old paper ones and the online statements, all of it. And I started going back through month by month since the day Daniel died. I want to walk you through what I found, because it took me all morning and half the afternoon, and every page was worse than the last. It started small. 2 months after the funeral, Thomas called me crying. Mom, I don't know how to say this, but the mortgage with everything the funeral costs were behind. Just a couple months. I hate to even ask. I gave him $8,000. Of course I did. He was grieving. We were all grieving. 4 months after that, it was Sophia's college. Tuition went up. Mom and Caroline lost a client at work. $12,000. Then the kitchen. Caroline wanted to remodel the kitchen. It'll add so much value to the house. Evelyn, it's really an investment. $25,000 for granite countertops and a farmhouse sink. Then a car. Thomas's SUV wasn't safe anymore. A new one well new to them, a certified pre-owned luxury model, $31,000. A family trip to Hawaii to help us all heal after losing Dad. I paid for it, all of it, and I wasn't even invited. They said the flights were expensive and it'd just be the 4 of them, but they were sure I understood and wouldn't. Dad have wanted them to be happy? Wouldn't Dad have wanted? Do you know how many times I heard that sentence over 3 years? They used my dead husband as a crowbar to pry my wallet open. Every single time. Dad would want us to be happy. Dad would want you to help. Dad always said family takes care of family. Daniel never said that. Daniel said the opposite, if anything. Daniel worked 40 years as a structural engineer, and he counted every dollar, and he'd have had a heart attack watching this. I sat at that table, and I added it up. And I added it up again because I thought I'd made a mistake. In 3 years, I had given my son and his wife just over $340,000. $340,000. Daniel and I saved that carefully over 42 years. And I'd handed it over piece by piece to people who put a laminated insult on my chest and laughed about it with their friends. I put my head down on the kitchen table, and for the first time since the funeral, I sobbed. Not quiet crying, the kind that shakes your whole body. The kind you do when you finally let yourself see a thing you've been refusing to look at. And when I lifted my head, I wasn't sad anymore. I was something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I was angry, and underneath the anger, cold and clear, was a decision forming. I didn't know its shape yet, but I knew it was coming. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Noah, my grandson. 24 years old, standing on my porch in a hoodie, shifting his weight from foot to foot, like he used to do as a little boy when he'd broken something and had to confess. "Hey, Grandma, can I come in?" "Of course, sweetheart. Always." I made him a plate of the cookies I keep in the freezer for exactly these moments, and he sat at the same kitchen table where I just added up my whole humiliation, and he wouldn't look at me. "Grandma," he finally said, "I need to apologize to you." "For what, honey?" "The name tag." I went very still. "You knew about that." "I saw it. At the reception. On the table." He put his face in his hands. "I saw it, and I didn't do anything. I should have grabbed it and torn it up before anybody saw it. I should have said something to Mom. I should have said something to you. And I froze. I've been sick about it all night." I reached across and put my hand on his arm. "Noah, look at me." He looked up. His eyes were red. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I'm a coward," he said. "Because whenever I push back on Mom and Dad, it turns into a whole thing, and I keep my head down. But this was too far. This was you, and I let it happen." His voice broke. "You've been so good to all of us, Grandma, and they treat you like—" He stopped. "Like a bank," I finished for him. He didn't argue. That silence told me everything. I got up and poured us both more milk mostly, so I'd have something to do with my hands, and when I sat back down, I asked him the question I'd been dreading since I overheard Caroline by the coat check. "Noah, at the wedding I heard your mother say something to your father about my house, about bringing it up after the honeymoon." Noah's whole body tensed. "You heard that?" "I heard a piece. Tell me the rest." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're not going to like it." "I don't like any of this. Tell me anyway." "A few weeks ago," he said slowly, "I was over at their place picking up some stuff from my old room, and I heard Mom and Dad in the kitchen. They didn't know I was there." He swallowed. "They were talking about you, about how you're rattling around in that big old house all by yourself. Mom said it doesn't make sense for one person to have a house that size." I kept my face very still. "Go on." Dad said the house has to be worth, what, $600,000–700,000 now. And Mom said if you sold it and moved into one of those retirement community places, you'd be happier. You'd have people your own age. And he stopped. "And what, Noah? And the money from the sale could help the family while you're still around to enjoy giving it." I heard those words, and I felt the last of the ice go out from under my feet. They didn't just want the money I'd already given them. They didn't just want whatever I had left in the bank. They wanted the house, Daniel's house, the house he built additions onto with his own 2 hands, the house where I still talk to him in the mirror every morning. They wanted to sell the walls out from under me and call it my happiness. They had it all planned. Noah went on miserable. "Mom said the timing had to be right. Get you feeling grateful and loved after the wedding, then bring up the retirement community, all gentle, make it sound like it was your idea. Dad kept saying you'd never go for it, and Mom kept saying she always goes for it. She just needs the right push. She always goes for it. That was my epitaph as far as they were concerned. She always goes for it." I looked around my kitchen, at the little marks on the door frame where Daniel measured Thomas's height every birthday until he was 18. At the window over the sink where Daniel installed the bird feeder because he knew I liked to watch the cardinals in the morning. At the whole life, 2 people built with their hands and their patience and their love, and I made my decision. Right there. It finished forming, and it clicked into place like a lock. I was not going to scream. I was not going to send an angry email. I was not going to call Thomas and give him a piece of my mind and let him talk his way out of it the way he always did. I was going to go quiet, and I was going to watch, because I'd learned something that afternoon that changed the way I saw everything. People show you exactly who they are when they think they've already won. And Thomas and Caroline thought they'd already won. Let them think it. "Noah," I said, "I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to not tell your parents you told me any of this. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly. "You're planning something." "I'm not planning anything," I said, which was a lie. "I'm just going to be a little more careful from now on. That's all." He studied my face for a long moment, and then for the first time all afternoon, my grandson smiled. "Good," he said. "It's about time somebody was careful with you. I want to tell you about the 3 days that followed, because those 3 days were the beginning of me becoming a different woman. Or maybe not a different woman. Maybe the woman I always was underneath 40 years of putting everyone else first. The morning after Noah's visit, my phone rang. Thomas. I let it go to voicemail. First time in 3 years I'd done that. He called again an hour later. I let that go too. Then a text. "Thomas, Mom, you okay? Caroline said you seemed off at the wedding. Call me." Seemed off. I had a name tag pinned to me calling me the family ATM, and I seemed off. I made myself a cup of tea and I sat with the phone and I thought about what to say. And then I did something I'd never done before. I typed out a completely calm, completely pleasant message that gave nothing away. "Evelyn, I'm fine, honey. Just tired. It was a big day. Talk soon." Then I put the phone down and I let him wonder. You have to understand how strange this felt for me. My whole instinct, my whole training was to reassure, to smooth, to rush over and prove I wasn't upset, prove I was still the reliable one, still the soft one, still the one who'd say yes. Sitting on my hands felt like holding my breath underwater, but I held it. Around noon, Caroline called. I let it ring. Around 2, she called again, and this time she left a voicemail, and I want to play you what she said more or less because it tells you everything. "Evelyn, hi, it's Caroline. So listen, we're all a little worried you disappeared kind of fast after the reception, and Noah mentioned you seemed upset. I really hope it wasn't about that silly name tag thing, because honestly, if I'd known you'd take it that way, I never would have anyway. We're actually planning a little family brunch this weekend, just us to celebrate now that the chaos is over. And there's some, family things we'd love to talk through with you. Nothing bad, just planning, so please come. Okay, love you. Bye." Some family things we'd love to talk through. I knew exactly what family things meant. Noah had told me. This was the brunch. This was the right push. This was where they were going to start working on me about the house, all gentle, all loving, make it sound like it was my idea. 3 days ago, I'd have walked into that brunch with no idea. I'd have sat there and let them plant the seed. I'd have gone home and thought about it, and probably, God help me, I'd have gone for it, because I always went for it. But I wasn't the same woman I'd been 3 days ago. I called Caroline back, and I made my voice warm as honey. "Caroline, I got your message. A brunch sounds lovely. Of course I'll come." "Oh, wonderful, Evelyn, I'm so glad. So you're not upset." "About what, dear?" A tiny pause. "Oh, nothing. Never mind. We'll see you Sunday, around 11. And I'll be there." I hung up, and I sat very still in my kitchen, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. I felt like I was the one holding the cards. They thought they were setting a trap for a soft old woman who always said yes. They had no idea. The soft old woman had already found the trap, walked all the way around it, and was coming to their brunch to watch them spring it on empty air. But there was one more thing I needed to do before Sunday. One phone call I'd been circling all afternoon, half afraid to make. Daniel's attorney, James Whitmore. James had handled everything when Daniel passed the will, the estate, all of it. He was Daniel's age, they'd known each other 40 years, played golf every other Saturday, until Daniel got too sick. After the funeral, he'd said to me, "Evelyn, anything you ever need, you call me. I mean that. For Daniel's sake and for yours." I hadn't called him once in 3 years. Why would I thought I understood our finances. I thought the will was simple everything to me, and someday everything to Thomas. Clean and easy. But sitting there with $340,000 of losses in front of me, and a plot against my house forming in my son's kitchen, I remembered something. A small strange thing from the day of the will reading 3 years ago that I'd been too numb with grief to think about. James had said, "There's a provision Daniel wanted included. We can go over the details whenever you're ready. It's protective in nature." And I'd said, "Later, James, I can't think right now." And I never asked. I never went back. Later. Always later. I found his number. My hand was shaking a little as I dialed. "Whitmore and Associates." "James, it's Evelyn Carter." There was a warm rush in his voice. "Evelyn, my goodness, I was starting to worry about you. How are you, dear?" "James," I said, and to my surprise, my voice came out steady. "I need to come see you, about Daniel's will. There was something you mentioned 3 years ago, a provision, a protective provision. You said we'd go over it when I was ready." A pause on the line. When James spoke again, his voice had changed. It had gone careful, alert. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "has something happened?" I looked down at the name tag on my kitchen table. The old lady paying for everything. "Yes," I said, "something's happened, and I have a feeling my husband knew it would." James was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that put a chill down the back of my neck and at the very same time put steel in my spine. "Come in tomorrow morning, Evelyn, 9 o'clock. There are some things Daniel wanted me to tell you." He paused. He hoped you'd never need to hear them, but he made me promise that if you ever did, if you ever came to me sounding the way you sound right now, I'd tell you everything. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table. "What things, James?" "Tomorrow," he said gently. "In person. Some things a man needs to say to his wife even after he's gone, and this is one of them." A breath. "Evelyn, I'm glad you called. I've been waiting 3 years for this phone call, and I was starting to think it might never come, or worse, that it had come too late." I hung up the phone. I sat alone in my kitchen as the afternoon light went gold and then gray. I looked at the name tag. I looked at the height marks on the door frame. I looked at the empty chair across the table where Daniel used to sit every night of our married life reading the paper, glancing up at me over his glasses. "You knew," I whispered to the empty chair. "You old fox. You knew, and you protected me, and I was too scared to look." I swear to you, in that moment, I could feel him in the room. I could feel him the way you feel someone standing behind you before they touch your shoulder. And I made him a promise, out loud, in our kitchen, in the house they wanted to take from me. "I'm done saying yes to people who don't respect me," I said. "I'm done being the old lady paying for everything. Whatever you left me, Daniel, I'm ready to hear it now. I'm finally ready." The house didn't answer. But for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like he was proud of me. I barely slept that night. I lay in Daniel's and my bed on my side the way I still do, and I stared at the ceiling and I ran James Whitmore's words over and over in my head. Some things a man needs to say to his wife even after he's gone. What things? What did Daniel know that I didn't? What had he seen in our son, in our daughter-in-law? That I'd been too soft, too trusting, too much of a mother to let myself see. By 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I got up, I made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table watching the sky turn from black to gray to a thin, pale gold. And the whole time that name tag sat there in front of me, I couldn't seem to put it away. It had become a kind of witness, a reminder. Every time I felt my old instincts creeping back in, every time some little voice inside me said, "Evelyn, maybe you're overreacting. Maybe it really was just a joke. Maybe you should just let it go and keep the peace." I looked at that name tag and the voice shut right up. At 8:45, I was sitting in the parking lot outside James Whitmore's office 10 minutes early, my hands folded in my lap. I hadn't been to that office since the will reading 3 years ago. I remembered almost nothing about it from that day. Grief does that. It takes a whole afternoon of your life and turns it into fog. James met me at the door himself. He'd aged since I saw him last, we all had, but his eyes were sharp and kind behind his glasses, and when he took my hand in both of his, I felt like I might cry just from the gentleness of it. It had been a long time since anyone had touched me like I was something precious, instead of something to be managed. "Evelyn," he said, "come in, sit down. Can I get you anything, coffee, water?" "I'm fine, James, thank you." He led me back to his office, and he closed the door, and he sat down across from me at his big desk with a folder in front of him. A thick folder. My name was on the tab. And then he just looked at me for a moment, and he said, "Tell me what happened. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the name tag. I told him about the calligraphy, about how somebody had taken the time to make it pretty, which somehow was the worst part. I told him about Caroline calling it a joke and telling me to lighten up. I told him about the $340,000 I'd added up at my kitchen table. I told him about Noah on my porch and about what he'd overheard, the house, the retirement community, the right push, the timing, all planned around the wedding. James listened to all of it without saying a word. He just watched me, and his face got grimmer and grimmer, and by the time I got to the part about the house, his jaw was set so hard I could see the muscle working. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and he took his glasses off, and he pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose, and he said something I will never forget. "Evelyn," he said, "Daniel told me this would happen, almost word for word." The room went very quiet. "What do you mean?" I said. "Told you what would happen." James put his glasses back on. He opened the folder, and he took out a document several pages stapled with Daniel's signature at the bottom of the last page, that big looping D I'd know anywhere, and he set it on the desk between us and turned it so I could read it. "About 8 months before he passed," James said, "Daniel came to me, alone. He didn't tell you he was coming, and he asked me never to bring it up unless it became necessary. He wanted to add a provision to his will, a specific one. He'd been thinking about it for a long time," he said. "What provision?" "I'll get to it, but first I need you to understand why, because that's the part Daniel cared about most. He made me promise that if I ever had to explain this to you, I'd explain the why before the what." James folded his hands. "Evelyn, how much did Daniel handle the money in your marriage?" I blinked. "All of it, mostly. He was the engineer. He was good with numbers. I trusted him completely." "And did you know what he saw in those last couple of years when Thomas would come around?" My stomach turned over. "What do you mean?" James's voice got very gentle. "Evelyn, Daniel wasn't blind. In the last 2 years of his life when he was sick, he watched some things happen that he didn't like. He watched Thomas and Caroline start treating your house like a bank branch. It started while he was still alive. Small things. Thomas would come by and there'd be a story about money trouble, and Daniel would notice that afterward the story didn't quite add up. He noticed that the more he did for them, the less they seemed to thank him and the more they seemed to expect." "He never told me any of this," I whispered. "No," James said. "He didn't, because he loved you and he loved Thomas, and he kept hoping he was wrong. He kept hoping it was just stress, just a rough patch. Fathers do that. But he also wasn't a fool, and he was a planner down to his bones, and he told me, 'I remember this exactly,' he said. 'James, when I'm gone, Evelyn's going to be alone with all of it, and she's the softest touch in 3 counties, and I am terrified they're going to bleed her dry and call it love.' I put my hand over my mouth, because that was it. That was exactly it. That was the whole 3 years of my life, and Daniel had seen it coming from beyond the grave." "He was right," I said. My voice cracked. "James, he was right." "I know." James reached across the desk and put his hand over mine. "And that's why he did what he did." He slid the document a little closer to me. "Read the highlighted section," he said. I put on my reading glasses, and my hands were trembling so much I had to hold the paper flat against the desk to read it. And this is what it said more or less in the dry, careful language of the law. It said that Daniel's estate, not just what he left directly, but the whole marital estate, the house, the savings, the investments, everything that would eventually pass down the line was structured with a condition, a protective condition. It said that upon my death, the remainder of the estate was to be divided among his descendants. But then there was a clause, and the clause said that any descendant who, and here I'm quoting the words that were burned into my brain from that moment on, who subjected Evelyn Carter to financial coercion, public humiliation, or attempts to deprive her of autonomy over her own person or property, would forfeit their share entirely, forfeit it, all of it. And that share would be redistributed to the descendants who had not done those things. And there was a second part, a part that made me gasp out loud right there in James Whitmore's office. It said that the determination of whether such coercion or humiliation had occurred was to be made at my sole discretion in consultation with the estate's attorney, with James, and that my judgment on the matter would be final and unchallengeable in any court. I read it 3 times. Then I looked up at James. "He gave me the power," I said slowly. "He gave me the power to decide." "Yes," James said. "He did. He said, and I'm quoting him again, 'Evelyn's too kind to ever go looking for a reason to cut anybody off. So if she ever decides somebody's crossed the line, you can be damn sure they crossed it. Her judgment is the only judgment I trust.'" James's eyes were wet now. "He believed in you, Evelyn, completely. He built you a shield, and then he handed you the sword, and he trusted you to know when to use it. And he prayed you never would." I sat there in that office holding my dead husband's will in my shaking hands, and I understood something I hadn't understood in 3 years of loneliness and giving and being made to feel small. Daniel hadn't left me alone. He'd been standing behind me the whole time. I just couldn't see him. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked. "In 3 years. If you knew all this was coming, why didn't you warn me?" James sighed. "Because Daniel told me not to. He was very specific about it. He said, 'Don't you go poisoning her against her own son on my say-so. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll rise to it. I want her to have every chance to be happy with them. Don't tell her about the clause unless she comes to you first hurting on her own, because if she comes to you on her own, it means it already happened, and then she needs to know she's not crazy and she's not powerless." James spread his hands. "So I waited, and I hoped like he hoped that you'd never call. And every Christmas that went by without a call from you, I thought, well, maybe he was wrong. Maybe they turned out fine." He looked at me. And then yesterday the phone rang. We sat with that for a moment, the weight of it. 3 years of my husband's foresight sitting in a folder waiting for me to be ready. "James," I said finally, "I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. The name tag, the $340,000, what Noah overheard about the house. Does any of that count under the clause?" James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said carefully, "Legally, Evelyn, that's not my call to make. It's yours. That's how Daniel built it. But if you're asking me for my professional opinion as the attorney who drafted this document and knew exactly what Daniel intended by every word of it, I'm asking." He leaned forward. "The name tag alone is textbook public humiliation, documented, witnessed, and frankly aggravated by the fact that it was premeditated. Somebody made it on purpose. The financial pattern, $340,000 extracted through repeated emotional pressure, using your late husband's memory as leverage. That's coercion plain as day, and I could make that argument in my sleep. And the plot to sell your house out from under you and move you into a facility against your genuine wishes. Evelyn, that's the exact scenario Daniel described to me, word for word. They're going to try to take her home and call it caring for her." He tapped the desk. "So my professional opinion, you have every legal ground you would ever need, every single one. The only question that matters, and it's a question only you can answer, is what you want to do with that." And that right there was the moment everything shifted. Because for 3 years I'd had no cards. I'd had nothing but my own soft heart and a checkbook that everybody helped themselves to. And now in the space of one morning I'd learned that I held every card in the deck. My husband had made sure of it. From the grave he'd made sure of it. But I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't triumph. It wasn't glee. If you'd have handed me a magic button right then, that would have cut Thomas off completely. I don't think I could have pressed it, because he was still my son. He was still the little boy with pneumonia. And some stubborn, foolish, hoping part of my heart still whispered, maybe it's not too late. Maybe he can still choose right. "James," I said, "I don't want to use this to punish anybody. I know you don't. I want to use it to find out the truth. I want to really know whether my son loves me or whether he loves my money. And I want to give him the chance to prove it's the first one. A real chance, a fair one." James smiled, a slow, sad, knowing smile. "Daniel said you'd say something exactly like that." He did. He said, "She won't want revenge, James. She'll want the truth. She'll want to give the boy one more chance even after he's proven he doesn't deserve it, because that's who she is." And then he said, James's voice caught. He said, "And that's why she deserves so much better than she thinks she does." I had to look away then. I had to look out the window for a minute and blink hard, because I was not going to fall apart in that office. I'd done enough falling apart at my kitchen table. When I could trust my voice again, I turned back to him. "There's a brunch," I said. "Sunday, at Thomas and Caroline's. Noah told me what it's really for. It's the right push. They're going to start working on me about the house." James's eyes narrowed. "Are you going?" "I'm going." I folded the will closed and slid it back across the desk to him. "But James, I'm not going to say a word about any of this. Not the clause, not the will, none of it. I'm going to go, and I'm going to sit there, and I'm going to watch. I want to see exactly how far they'll go. I want to see it with my own eyes with no doubt left in me. Because if I'm going to make a decision this big, I need to be sure. I need to be certain." James studied me for a long moment, and then he did something that surprised me. He nodded slow, and something like respect came into his face. "You know," he said, "when Daniel first told me about all this, I'll admit, I had my doubts about the discretion clause. Handing that much power to a grieving widow, no oversight, her word final as a lawyer, it made me nervous. I thought, what if grief clouds her judgment? What if she's too soft? What if she's too harsh?" He shook his head. "But sitting here right now, watching you decide to walk into that brunch and gather evidence instead of storming in with an accusation. Evelyn, I understand now why Daniel trusted you completely. You've got a cooler head than half the litigators I know." I almost laughed. I don't feel cool, James. I feel like my whole life turned upside down in the space of a week. That's exactly why you're doing this right. He stood up and came around the desk and he took both my hands again. Go to the brunch, watch, listen, and whatever you decide after, call me, day or night. I mean that. Daniel would have my hide if I let you face this alone, and I don't intend to. I left his office that morning a different woman than the one who'd walked in. I want to try to explain the difference to you because it's important. When I walked in, I was a victim. A soft old woman who'd been used and humiliated and didn't quite know how it had happened or what to do about it. When I walked out, I don't know the right word for it. I was armed, not with a weapon, with the truth and with power, and most of all with the knowledge that the man I loved for 42 years had seen this coming and had reached out from beyond death to steady me, to tell me I wasn't crazy, to tell me I wasn't powerless, to tell me in the only way he could, I've got you, Evelyn. I've still got you. I drove home the long way. I don't know why. I drove past the little diner where Daniel and I used to get pancakes on Sunday mornings before Thomas was born. I drove past the church where we got married. I let myself remember for a little while the life we'd built back before it all got so complicated. Back when love was just love and nobody had a price tag. And somewhere on that drive, I made peace with what I had to do. I was going to walk into that brunch on Sunday with a smile on my face and a lie in my pocket, and I was going to let my son and my daughter-in-law show me exactly who they were. The next 2 days I kept to myself. Thomas texted me twice more checking in, and both times I answered warm and brief and gave nothing away. Caroline called once to confirm the brunch, and I told her I was looking forward to it, and I even asked what I could bring, because that's what a soft old woman would ask, and I heard her smile through the phone when she said, "Oh, just bring yourself, Evelyn, just you." And I thought, yes, just me. That's all you've ever wanted at these things, just me and my checkbook. On Saturday night, Noah called. "Grandma," he said low, like he was afraid of being overheard. "Are you really going tomorrow?" "I'm really going, sweetheart. You know what it's for." "I know exactly what it's for." He was quiet a second. You're not going to let them talk you into it, are you? The house." And I heard the fear in his voice, and it broke my heart a little because this child had been carrying the weight of my situation all by himself, feeling guilty, feeling powerless, watching his own parents treat his grandmother like a resource to be strip-mined. "Noah," I said, "listen to me. I need you to trust me. Whatever happens at that brunch tomorrow, whatever you see, whatever you hear, I need you to stay quiet and let it happen. Can you do that for me?" "Grandma, that sounds... Do you trust me?" A long pause. "Yeah," he said finally. "I trust you." "Then trust me tomorrow. And Noah, no matter what your parents say to me, no matter how it looks, I want you to know that I know you're on my side. You're the one who warned me. You're the one who had the courage to tell me the truth when everybody else was laughing. I won't forget that. Whatever happens, you and I are okay." "All right." I heard him swallow. "All right, Grandma." "Good boy. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up and I sat in my quiet house and I looked at the empty chair across the table and I said, "Well, Daniel, tomorrow we find out." And I swear the house felt warmer than it had in 3 years. Sunday morning I got up early. I did my hair. I put on a nice blouse, nothing fancy, a soft cardigan, the kind of thing a harmless old lady wears to a family brunch. I looked at myself in the mirror, the same mirror where I talked to Daniel every morning, and I practiced my smile. My warm, agreeable, easy-to-manipulate smile. The one that had cost me $340,000. "One more time," I told my reflection. "One more time we play the soft old woman, and then never again." I drove over to Thomas and Caroline's a little after 11. Their house, the house with the kitchen. I'd paid $25,000 to remodel, sat up on its nice lot with its nice landscaping, and I pulled into the driveway behind Caroline's car, and I sat there for a second with my hands on the wheel gathering myself. "Watch," I told myself. "Just watch. Let them show you." I went in, and the performance began, theirs and mine both. "Evelyn." Caroline swept toward me the second I came through the door, arms open, all warmth, and folded me into a hug that felt like being embraced by a mannequin. "I'm so happy you came. You look wonderful. Doesn't she look wonderful, Thomas?" "Great, Mom." Thomas kissed my cheek. Come in. Sit down. Can I get you a mimosa?" "Just orange juice, honey. Thank you." Sophia was there back from, well, I realized then that the honeymoon hadn't happened yet, which meant the Italy trip Caroline had announced at the earlier brunch was still just a plan built on money I'd never agreed to give. Sophia gave me a hug that was noticeably warmer than her mother's, and I saw something flicker in her eyes when she looked at me, something uncertain, something almost ashamed. Interesting, I thought. Sophia had been at the wedding. Sophia had surely seen or heard about the name tag, and here she was, unable to quite meet my eyes. Noah was there too, over by the window, and when I caught his eye, he gave me the tiniest nod, and I gave him the tiniest nod back, and then we both pretended we hadn't. They sat me down at the beautiful remodeled kitchen island, my granite, my farmhouse sink, and they fussed over me and brought me a plate and asked how I was feeling and told me again how much they'd loved having me at the wedding. And the whole time I smiled and nodded and said all the right soft old lady things, and I watched. And I want to tell you, they were good. They were smooth. If I hadn't known what was coming, if Noah hadn't warned me, I'd have been completely disarmed by it. All that warmth, all that attention. For 20 minutes they made me feel like the most beloved matriarch in America. And then, right on schedule, Caroline set down her mimosa and folded her hands and got a soft, concerned look on her face, and she said, "Evelyn, can we talk to you about something? Something we've all been thinking about because we love you so much and we worry about you." And there it was, the push. "Of course, dear," I said, and I took a sip of my orange juice, and I settled in to watch my family show me exactly who they were. "We've just been so worried about you," Caroline began, "all alone in that big house. Ever since Daniel passed, God rest him, it's just so much house for one person, isn't it? All those stairs, all that upkeep. And Thomas and I were saying just the other night, weren't we, Thomas?" "We were," Thomas said, nodding gravely. "We were saying we just want you to be happy, Evelyn. We want you to be safe and comfortable and around people instead of rattling around all alone in that great big empty house." Rattling around. The exact words Noah had overheard. Hearing them come out of Caroline's mouth in real time, dressed up in all that fake concern, I felt a cold, clear anger settle over me. But I kept my face soft and confused and grateful. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said. "What are you suggesting?" And Thomas leaned in, and my own son, the boy I raised, looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, we think it might be time to think about selling the house." There it was, out loud, in the open. The thing they'd been plotting for weeks. "There's this wonderful community." Caroline jumped in, breathless, now sensing an opening. "Whispering Pines, it's gorgeous. It's got a pool and activities and dinners. You'd make so many friends your own age, and it would just be so much easier for you, no more worrying about the roof or the yard or any of it. And the thing is, Mom," Thomas said, and here his voice dropped into that reasonable, gentle register he used when he was about to ask for money. "A house like yours in this market, it's worth, what, $650, $700? That's a lot of money just sitting there in walls and grass. If you sold, you'd have plenty for a beautiful place at Whispering Pines, and there'd be enough left over to really help the family. Sophia and Mark are just starting out. We've got some things we're trying to do. And wouldn't it be nice, Mom, to be able to see your money doing good for the people you love while you're still here to enjoy it, instead of it all being locked up in a house you don't even need?" And there it was, the whole thing, laid out on the granite countertop I'd paid for. Sell the house, move into a home, hand over the proceeds, and every bit of it wrapped up in the language of love. "We're worried about you. We want you happy. We want you safe. Wouldn't it be nice to see your money doing good?" I looked around that kitchen, at Thomas leaning forward eager, at Caroline watching my face with hawk eyes ready to adjust the pitch the instant she saw resistance, at Sophia who'd gone quiet and was staring at her plate, at Noah by the window jaw tight watching me the way you watch a person walking a tightrope. And I understood in that moment with total clarity that Daniel had been right about everything. Every word. They're going to try to take her home and call it caring for her. Here it was, happening. Exactly as he'd predicted 3 years after he'd drawn his last breath. Now, 3 days ago at my kitchen table, I might have handled this differently. I might have flared up. I might have said something sharp and given them the chance to backpedal and reframe and make me feel like the crazy one. But I'd learned something in James Whitmore's office. I'd learned patience. I'd learned that people show you the most when they think they're winning. So I didn't flare up. Instead, I set down my orange juice, and I let a little tremor come into my voice, and I said softly, Oh, I don't know. This is a lot to think about. The house means so much to me. Your father and I I let my voice catch, and I watched Caroline's eyes light up because she thought she was watching me crack. But you're right that it's a lot of upkeep, and I do get lonely. You do, Mom, Thomas said, gently moving in. I know you do. And you really think this place, Whispering Pines, you think I'd be happy there? So happy, Caroline breathed. Evelyn, I've already got the brochures. I could take you to tour it this week. There's a unit available right now, a beautiful one-bedroom. And honestly, at your age, one bedroom is really all you... She caught herself. All you'd want. Less to clean. At your age. There it was again. That little knife slipped in so smoothly, she didn't even notice she was doing it. This week, I repeated softly. That's very soon. Well, we don't want to rush you, Thomas said in a tone that meant they very much wanted to rush me. But the market's good right now, Mom, and that unit won't stay available. Sometimes when there's an opportunity, you have to move on it. Dad always used to say that, didn't he? He was a smart businessman. He'd tell you the same thing. And that was the line that did it. That was the moment the last shred of doubt left my body. Because Daniel would never have said any such thing. Daniel would have thrown these people out of the house. And here was my son, using his dead father's memory one more time as a crowbar to pry loose the very roof over my head. I looked at Thomas. My son. And behind my soft, trembling, agreeable face, something in me went as hard and cold and clear as a diamond. Now I know, I thought. Now I know for certain. Thank you, Daniel. You were right. And now I'm sure. But I didn't show them any of that. Not yet. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to watch, and I'd watched, and now the plan was to go home and call James Whitmore and begin. So I dabbed at my eyes with a napkin, and I said in my softest, most defeated voice, "Let me think about it. It's a big decision. Let me think about it for a little while. Can you give me that?" And I watched them exchange a glance. A quick one. Triumphant. They thought they had me. They thought I was one gentle tour of Whispering Pines away from signing my life over. "Of course, Mom," Thomas said, patting my hand. "Take all the time you need." She always goes for it, Caroline had said weeks ago in this very kitchen. She just needs the right push. Well, they'd given me the push, and I'd let them think it landed. I finished my orange juice. I complimented Caroline on the eggs. I told Sophia she was glowing. I even hugged Thomas at the door and told him I loved him, and God help me, I meant it even then, even knowing everything, because he was still my son. And a mother's love doesn't have an off switch no matter how much it should. But as I walked to my car, I caught Noah's eye through the window, and I gave him the smallest nod. And I saw the relief flood his face because he understood. He understood that his grandmother had walked into the lion's den and walked out again with everything she needed, and that the soft, trembling old woman who'd just promised to think about it was in fact about to do something none of them saw coming. I got in my car. I backed out of the driveway, and I drove exactly 4 blocks until their house was well out of sight. And then I pulled over to the curb, and I put the car in park, and I sat there with both hands on the wheel, and I let out a long, shaking breath. Then I picked up my phone, and I called James Whitmore. He answered on the second ring. "Evelyn, how did it go?" "It went exactly the way Daniel said it would," I said. My voice was perfectly steady now. All the softness was gone. "They asked me to sell the house. They want me to move into a retirement community this week. They said it's because they love me and they're worried about me. And Thomas used his father's memory to do it. Again." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And how are you feeling?" I looked out the windshield at the quiet suburban street, at the nice houses with the nice lawns where nice families were having nice Sunday brunches, and I thought about how you never really know what's happening inside any of them. "I feel certain, James," I said. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel completely certain." "Then let's talk about what happens next," he said. "Because, Evelyn, now that you're certain, there are some decisions to make, and some of them you're going to have to make soon." "I know," I said. "I'm ready. Tell me everything." "Tell me everything," I said again, gripping the phone. James took a breath on the other end of the line. "All right, here's where we stand. You've now personally witnessed an attempt to deprive you of autonomy over your own property, the house dressed up as concern for your well-being. That, combined with the documented financial coercion and the public humiliation at the wedding, means that under Daniel's clause, you would be fully within your rights to invoke the forfeiture provision against Thomas and Caroline. Today, if you wanted to. I could draft the notice this afternoon." I sat in my car on that quiet street, and I let that sink in. The power of it. One phone call, one signature, and my son would lose everything his father had meant for him. But, James went on, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. I don't think you should, not yet, and I don't think that's what you want either. No, I said, it isn't. Tell me what you do want, Evelyn, in your own words, because whatever we do next, I want it to be your decision, not mine, and not Daniel's from 3 years ago. I looked out the windshield for a long moment, and what came out of my mouth surprised even me. I want to stop paying, I said. That's the first thing. I want to close the wallet, completely. Not with a big speech, not with an announcement. I just want to start saying no, quietly. And I want to see what happens when the money stops. Because, James, I think the money has been like a fog over all of this. As long as I keep paying, I'll never really know what's underneath. But if I just stop, then whatever's left, whatever they still feel about me after the checks stop coming, that's the truth. That's the real thing, and I need to see it. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, That is the wisest thing I've heard anybody say in this office in a long time, and I've been doing this 40 years. So that's what I want to do first, I said. I want to stop paying, and I want to change my whole life while I'm at it, and I want to watch them react. And then, only then, once I've seen the truth all the way to the bottom, then we'll talk about the clause, about what to do with it. And the house. The house is not for sale, I said, and my voice came out like iron. Not this week, not next week, not ever. Daniel built additions on that house with his own 2 hands. I'm going to die in that house, James, when God decides it's time, and not one day sooner, and it'll be my choice and nobody else's. Good, James said. Then here's what I'd suggest. Legally, we do nothing today. We hold the clause in reserve. It's your shield and your sword, and a shield doesn't do you any good if you throw it at somebody the first chance you get. We keep it ready. In the meantime, you do exactly what you said. You stop the payments, you live your life, and you watch. And you document. Anything they say to you about money, about the house, keep a note of it. Dates, words. Not because we necessarily need it, but because you deserve to have your own memory backed up so that no one, not Thomas, not Caroline, not that little voice in your own head, can ever make you doubt what really happened. I can do that. And Evelyn, one more thing. This is going to be harder than you think. Not the legal part, the human part. When the money stops, they're going to escalate. First, they'll be confused, then they'll be hurt, or they'll act hurt. Then they'll get angry, and somewhere in there, they're going to hit you with everything they've got. And a lot of it is going to be about Daniel, and a lot of it is going to be designed to make you feel like a cruel, selfish, ungrateful old woman who's abandoning her own family. He paused. You need to be ready for that, because the woman who raised a son and buried a husband and never once put herself first, that woman is going to feel every one of those blows, and you're going to have to hold the line anyway. I closed my eyes, because he was right. I knew he was right. The hardest part wasn't going to be the money. The hardest part was going to be my own heart. I'll hold the line, I said. I've been holding everybody else up my whole life, James. I think it's about time I held up myself. That's my girl, he said, and it was such a Daniel thing to say that I had to laugh even with tears in my eyes. Now go home, rest, and start living, Evelyn. Start today. So that's what I did. I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, because those weeks were when I stopped being the woman on the name tag and started being myself again. The first test came 4 days later. Thomas called all warmth, and after 2 minutes of small talk, he got to it. Hey, Mom, so Sophia's honeymoon, the Italy trip. The travel agent needs a deposit by Friday to lock in the good rates. It's about $8,000. And I was thinking, since you were already so generous with the wedding, maybe you'd want to... And here it was, the first no, the very first one. And I want you to understand how hard it was, because my whole body wanted to say yes. 30 years of yes. My mouth was practically forming the word before my brain caught up. But I thought about the name tag, and I thought about James, and I held the line. Oh, Thomas, I said, keeping my voice light and pleasant. I'm afraid I can't help with that one. There was a silence on the line, a silence I'd never heard before in 30 years, because I'd never given him a reason to be silent. What? He said. I said I can't help with the honeymoon, sweetheart, but I'm sure you and Caroline will figure something wonderful out for them. Mom, it's just $8,000, it's not... I know, honey, but my answer's no. Is everything okay? Is there a money problem? Do we need to talk about? And there it was, the first pivot so fast, it almost made me laugh. The instant I said no, his very first thought was that there might be something wrong with me, that I might be running out, that the well might be drying up. Not is my mother upset. Not did I do something, just is the money still there. Everything's fine, Thomas, I said. I've just decided to be a little more careful with things, that's all. Give Sophia my love. And I hung up. I sat there afterward shaking like a leaf. My heart was pounding. I felt like I'd committed some kind of crime. But underneath the shaking there was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. That night I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went up to the spare bedroom, the one that used to be my sewing room before it became a storage room for all the things I couldn't bear to deal with after Daniel died, and I dug through the closet until I found my old wooden box of oil paints. I used to paint, you know. Before Thomas, before everything. I was even good once. My art teacher in college told me I had a real eye. And then life happened the way it does, and the paints went in a box, and the box went in a closet, and 40 years went by. I opened that box, and the smell of the linseed oil hit me, and I sat right down on the floor of that spare room and I cried. But they were different tears this time. They weren't sad tears. They were the tears you cry when you find a piece of yourself you thought was gone for good. The next morning, I signed up for a painting class at the community center downtown. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, $20 a session. I hadn't spent $20 on myself in longer than I could remember. The class was full of people my age, mostly, and a few younger, and the teacher was a wonderful woman named Ruth who wore paint-stained overalls and said things like, "There are no mistakes in art, only happy discoveries." And I know that sounds corny, but I'm telling you, walking into that room full of easels and turpentine and light, being called by my own name, "Evelyn, that's lovely. Look at the way you did the sky." Not, "Mom, can you help?" Not, "Grandma, the wedding, the honeymoon." Not, "The old lady paying for everything." But Evelyn, I felt like I was coming back to life. I made a friend there. A woman named Margaret, about my age, widowed like me, sharp as a tack and funny as anything. After the second class, we went for coffee, and I ended up telling her the whole story, the name tag, the money, the house, all of it. And Margaret listened to the whole thing, and then she set down her coffee cup and she said, "Evelyn, honey, can I tell you something my mother told me? Please." She said, "When you're generous, people learn your generosity. When you stop, they learn your worth." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're about to find out your worth, sweetheart. And I've got a feeling it's a whole lot more than $340,000. I have thought about that sentence every day since. The no's got easier after that. Not easy, never easy, but easier. 2 weeks after the honeymoon call, Caroline called about a small issue with Sophia and Mark's new apartment deposit. No. A week after that, Thomas needed just a little help with his property taxes. No. And each time the same thing happened first. The shocked silence, then the probing questions about whether I was all right, whether the money was all right, and then increasingly an edge, a coldness creeping into their voices that had never been there before back when I was saying yes. Because here's the thing I was learning week by week, no by no, the warmth had been conditional. All of it. Every hug, every "we love you, Mom," every "we're so worried about you." It had all been the packaging the money came wrapped in. And now that the money had stopped, the packaging was coming off, and I was getting to see what had been inside the whole time. About a month and the phone calls started to change character entirely. Caroline called one evening, and she didn't even bother with small talk. She just launched right in. "Evelyn, Thomas and I are really concerned. You've been different. You're not returning calls the way you used to. You said no to helping Sophia, your own granddaughter, with her honeymoon, which frankly everyone's a little hurt about. And now you're running off to these art classes and coffee with strangers. We're wondering if maybe, well, whether you might not be thinking totally clearly these days, whether the grief might be catching up with you." And there it was. The twist I should have seen coming and didn't. Because James had warned me they'd escalate, but I hadn't imagined this. They weren't just going to be hurt. They weren't just going to be angry. They were going to start building a case that I was losing my mind. I gripped the phone. "What exactly are you saying, Caroline?" "I'm just saying we love you. And when an older person suddenly changes, their whole personality stops acting like themselves, starts making strange financial decisions, isolating from family, spending money on frivolous things. Well, sometimes that's a sign that they need more help than they realize. That's all. We just want you to be safe." Making strange financial decisions. The strange financial decision of keeping my own money, isolating from family. The isolation of making a friend and taking a painting class, spending money on frivolous things, $20 on paint. They were taking every single healthy thing I'd done to reclaim my life, and they were reframing it as evidence of decline. And I understood with a chill exactly where this was headed. If they could establish that I wasn't thinking clearly, if they could get that idea planted with a doctor maybe, or worse with a court, then they wouldn't need to convince me to sell the house and hand over the money. They could just take control of it, of everything, of me. "Caroline," I said, and I made my voice very calm, because I'd learned that calm frightened them more than anger ever could. "I want to make sure I understand you. Are you suggesting I'm not competent to manage my own affairs?" "I didn't say that, because I'm hearing a lot of concern about my financial decisions right at the moment. Those decisions stopped benefiting you. That's a very interesting coincidence." Silence. "I'm going to let you go now, Caroline," I said pleasantly. "Give my love to Thomas." And I hung up, and this time I didn't shake. This time I was too angry to shake, because they had crossed a line I hadn't even known was there. It was one thing to use me. It was another thing entirely to try to convince the world, and maybe a judge, that I was a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. I called James first thing the next morning and told him everything Caroline had said word for word from the notes I'd made the night before. I was quiet for a long time. And then he said in a voice I hadn't heard from him before, low and hard, "Evelyn, I need you to listen to me very carefully now. This just became something different." "I know." "What they're describing, the pattern they're building, that's the groundwork for a conservatorship petition, a guardianship. If they can convince a court that you're incapable of managing your own affairs, they can have themselves appointed to manage them for you. Your money, your house, your medical decisions, everything. It happens to older people more than anybody wants to admit, and it almost always happens exactly like this: family members who suddenly become very concerned the moment they stop getting what they want. The blood went cold in my veins. Can they do that? Can they actually? Not if we get ahead of it, and not against someone as sharp as you. But Evelyn, we have to move now. We can't wait anymore. This isn't about the clause and the inheritance now. This is about protecting you today, this month, from an attempt to strip you of your own freedom." He paused. "How do you feel physically, mentally, truly?" "I feel better than I've felt in 3 years, James. I'm painting. I'm sleeping. I made a friend. I'm sharper than I've been since Daniel died." "Good. Then here's what we do. First, I want you to see your doctor, not because anything's wrong, but because I want a clean, dated, documented cognitive assessment from a physician in your file stating that you're of perfectly sound mind. That single piece of paper will demolish any competency claim they try to make before it gets off the ground. Second, we're going to put some legal protections in place around you, an advance directive, a power of attorney that names someone you trust, so that if anything ever does happen to you, it's your person in charge and not Thomas and Caroline by default. And third," his voice hardened again, "third, we start seriously discussing the clause. Because Evelyn, what they're doing right now, trying to have you declared incompetent to seize control of your property, that is the single most flagrant violation of Daniel's protective provision I could possibly imagine. This is precisely what he built that clause to stop." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. The name tag was still there. I'd never put it away. "Daniel saw all of this," I said quietly. "Didn't he? Not just the money, not just the house. He saw that they might try to take me too. My mind, my freedom." "I think he did," James said gently. "I think Daniel understood something about people that most of us don't want to believe. That when someone decides another person exists to be used, there's no natural bottom to it. It just keeps going. First the money, then the house, then the person themselves. And he was determined that you would never be helpless in front of it no matter what." I looked at the empty chair across the table. "Set up the appointments, James," I said. "All of them. The doctor, the paperwork, everything. I'm ready." I saw my doctor that Friday, Dr. Patel, who I'd been seeing for 15 years. I told her exactly what was going on, that my family was suggesting I wasn't of sound mind, and that I needed it on the record from her whether I was or wasn't. She listened to the whole story, and by the end of it she was quietly furious on my behalf, and she ran me through a full cognitive assessment right there in her office, the whole battery of it. And then she looked at me over her glasses and she said, "Evelyn, your cognition is completely intact. Frankly, you're sharper than half my patients half your age. I'm going to write all this up in detail dated today, and I'm going to note the context that this assessment was requested in response to family members questioning your competence. And Evelyn," she leaned forward, If anyone ever tries to use your grief or your age against you, you send them straight to me. I'll set them right." I could have kissed her. Then James's paperwork. I named my power of attorney, and I want you to know who I named. Not Thomas, not Caroline. I named Noah, my grandson, the one who'd warned me, the one who'd had the courage to tell me the truth when everyone else was laughing. I told James, if I'm ever truly not able to speak for myself, I want the one person in this family who ever put me before the money to be the one holding the pen. And James said that was the wisest choice I could make, and he drew it all up. I didn't tell Noah right away. I wanted to protect him. I didn't want him caught between me and his parents. But about a week later, he called me and he was upset, and it all came out. "Grandma," he said, and his voice was tight, "I have to tell you something. Mom and Dad, they had a meeting with some lawyer about you. I overheard part of it. They're talking about, I don't even want to say it, a conservatorship," I said quietly. Silence. "How did you—" "I know, sweetheart. I've known for a little while now, and I've already taken steps. I want you to stop worrying about it. I'm protected. More protected than they have any idea. But Grandma, they're saying you've lost touch, that you're not yourself, that you're being reckless with money. It's all lies, and I tried to tell them. I told them you're totally fine. And Mom just looked at me and said, I don't understand how these things work, and that I'm too close to see it clearly." His voice cracked. "They're twisting everything. I'm scared for you. And I want to tell you what I felt in that moment hearing this young man so frightened for me. I felt a fierce protective love, and I felt something else too. I felt a kind of grief. Because this was my family we were talking about. This was my son, and the wife he'd chosen sitting in a lawyer's office trying to figure out how to take my freedom away. And no matter how ready I was, no matter how protected, that fact just sat in my chest like a stone. "Noah," I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to keep it between us for now. Can you do that?" "Yes. There's a provision in your grandfather's will, a protective one. He put it there before he died because he saw that something like this might happen. And it gives me the power to protect myself and to hold the people who've hurt me accountable. I've been holding it in reserve, hoping I wouldn't have to use it, hoping your parents would come to their senses. But what they're doing now, this conservatorship business, Noah, this is exactly the kind of thing your grandfather built that provision to stop." I was quiet, taking it in. "So you can stop them. I can stop them, completely. And I've named you Noah. You should know this. I've named you as the person I trust to speak for me, if I'm ever truly unable to speak for myself. Not your parents. You." I heard him make a sound, a kind of broken breath. "Grandma, I don't why me after everything, after I stayed quiet at the wedding, because you're the only one who ever loved me instead of what I could give," I said simply. "That's why. And your grandfather would have chosen exactly the same." He couldn't talk for a minute. Neither could I. Then he said, thick-voiced, "What do you need me to do?" "Right now, nothing. Just keep being who you are and keep your eyes open, because I have a feeling your parents aren't going to slow down. I think they're going to push harder. And when they do, when they finally overreach the way people like that always do, I'll be ready." I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Not from Thomas, from a law office, a firm downtown I'd never heard of. And my hands went a little cold as I opened it, standing there at the end of my driveway, because I already knew somehow what it was going to be. It was a letter, a formal letter, notifying me that my son Thomas and my daughter-in-law Caroline had filed a petition for temporary conservatorship of the person and estate of Evelyn Carter on the grounds that I was, and I'm quoting the letter now, "increasingly unable to manage my own financial and personal affairs due to age-related cognitive decline and the effects of prolonged unresolved grief." I stood at the end of my driveway in the afternoon sun, and I read that letter twice. My own son. My own son had gone to a court in writing with his name signed to it and asked a judge to take away my freedom, to declare me incompetent, to put himself in charge of my money, my house, my medical decisions, my whole life. The little boy I'd nursed through pneumonia, the boy whose height I'd measured on the doorframe, the boy I'd given $340,000 and a wedding and a kitchen and a car and a vacation I wasn't even invited to. He wanted to have me declared out of my mind so he could take everything. And you know what? Standing there in my driveway with that letter shaking in my hand, I did not cry. I'd cried enough. I'd cried at my kitchen table over the checkbook. I'd cried on the floor of the sewing room over Daniel's paints. I was all done crying over Thomas and Caroline. Instead, I felt something settle over me, cold and clear and final. The last piece falling into place, the last shred of a mother's hope, the maybe he'll come around finally completely mercifully gone. Because they hadn't just insulted me, they hadn't just used me, they'd tried to erase me, to declare that Evelyn Carter, the woman who'd built a life across 42 years and buried the man she loved and raised the very son now trying to cage her, that this woman no longer existed, no longer had a mind, no longer had the right to choose her own life. I walked back into the house. I sat down at the kitchen table. I picked up the name tag, The Old Lady Paying for Everything, and I looked at it for a long moment. And then for the first time in months, I smiled. Not a soft smile, not a sad smile. I smiled the way Daniel used to smile right before he won. Then I picked up the phone and I called James Whitmore, and when he answered, I said 7 words. Just 7. James, they filed. It's time. All of it. And James Whitmore, God bless him, 40 years a lawyer, and Daniel's oldest friend in the world, was quiet for just a second. And then he said in a voice like a door closing, "Evelyn, come to my office tomorrow at 9. Bring that letter, and I promise you by the time we're finished, your son and his wife are going to wish they'd never sent it. Daniel built you a fortress, and they just walked right up and knocked on the gate. Now we open it." I was at James Whitmore's office at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, that letter in my purse, and I felt calmer than I had any right to feel. James read the petition through twice slowly, his reading glasses down on the end of his nose, and by the time he finished, he was almost smiling. Not a happy smile, a grim, satisfied lawyer's smile. "Evelyn," he said, setting the papers down, "I've been practicing law for 40 years, and I want you to understand something. In their arrogance and their greed, your son and his wife have just handed us the single strongest possible case for invoking Daniel's clause that could ever exist. Do you understand what they've done? They've documented it. They've put it in writing, filed it with a court, signed their names to it. An attempt to deprive you of autonomy over your own person and property. That's not my interpretation of some overheard conversation anymore. That's a legal filing. It doesn't get any more clear-cut than this." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," James said, "we do 2 things at once. First, we crush the conservatorship petition. And Evelyn, it's going to be embarrassingly easy because they built it on sand. They claim cognitive decline. We have Dr. Patel's assessment from 3 weeks ago, a full cognitive workup dated documented stating you're of completely sound mind. They claim you're isolating and behaving erratically. We have a painting instructor, a friend, a doctor, all of whom will testify that you're thriving. They claim you're being reckless with money. The truth is, you stopped giving them money, which is the opposite of reckless. Every single pillar of their petition collapses the moment we push on it. When we're done, the court isn't just going to deny their petition. The judge is going to look at them like they tried to rob a widow in broad daylight, which is exactly what they did. And the second thing," James's face turned serious, "the second thing is the clause. Now, I want to be very careful here because this is the biggest decision you'll make in all of this, and it has to be yours. Invoking Daniel's provision means Thomas and Caroline forfeit their entire inheritance, permanently. It gets redistributed among the descendants who didn't harm you. That's a door that once you walk through it doesn't open again. So I have to ask you plainly, and I need you to really sit with it before you answer." He looked at me steadily. "Is that what you want, knowing it's your son?" And I want to be honest with you about this because it was the hardest question anyone has ever asked me. I sat in that chair and I thought about it, really thought about it. Because James was right, this wasn't like saying no to a honeymoon deposit. This was final. This was me with my own hand closing a door on my only child. I thought about Thomas as a baby, the weight of him asleep on my chest. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike running behind him down the sidewalk. I thought about his college graduation, how proud Daniel had been, how we'd taken him and all his friends out to dinner. I thought about all of it, 40 years of loving that boy with everything I had. And then I thought about the name tag, and the $340,000, and Caroline saying at your age like a little knife, and that letter sitting in my purse with my son's signature on it, asking a court to declare that I no longer had a mind of my own. And I understood something that took my breath away. The Thomas I was grieving, the baby, the boy on the bike, the proud graduate that Thomas was already gone, had been gone a long time. Maybe he'd never been quite what I'd believed. The person who'd filed that petition wasn't my little boy. My little boy would never. This was a grown man who had looked at his own mother, a grieving widow, and seen a resource to be seized. "James," I said slowly, "can I ask you something before I answer?" "Anything. If I invoke the clause, is there any way to do it that still leaves a door open? Not for the money, I mean for him. Is there a way to say, you've lost the inheritance and that's final, but if you ever become a person who loves your mother instead of her bank account, there's still a family here for you? Because I don't want revenge, James. I never wanted revenge. I want him to have the chance to become someone I could love again, even if he never takes it." James took his glasses off, and he looked at me for a long moment, and his eyes were wet. "Daniel told me you'd ask that too," he said quietly. He said, and I'll never forget this, he said, "She's going to want to punish the sin without damning the sinner. She's going to want to close the wallet but leave the door open. And you make sure she can, James, because that mercy is the best thing about her, and I won't have this clause turn her into something hard." I put my hand over my mouth. "He knew me better than I knew myself," I whispered. "He loved you more than you ever let yourself believe," James said. "And yes, there's a way. The clause handles the money that's automatic, that's the forfeiture, and frankly they earned it 3 times over. But nothing in that document requires you to close your heart. That part was always going to be up to you. And the fact that you're asking the question sitting here with that letter in your purse, Evelyn, that tells me everything about who you are." I sat there for a long moment, and then I made my decision, the biggest one of my life. "Invoke it," I said. "Draft whatever you need to draft. Thomas and Caroline forfeit their inheritance, all of it. That's final and I won't be moved on it. But I want it done with dignity, James. No gloating, no cruelty. I want it done the way Daniel would have done it, clean, fair, and with the door left open just a crack, so that if my son ever chooses to become someone better, he'll know the way back isn't bricked up." I took a breath. "And I want to tell them myself, in person. I don't want them finding out from a letter in the mail the way I did. Whatever they've done, I'm still his mother. He hears it from me." James nodded slowly. "Then that's how we'll do it. I'll prepare everything. And Evelyn, I'll be there when you tell them. You're not doing this alone. Daniel would haunt me forever if I let you face those 2 by yourself." We spent the next hour going through the practical pieces. The response to the conservatorship petition, which James filed that very afternoon, along with Dr. Patel's assessment attached as an exhibit, which he told me later, made the opposing attorney call within 2 days, trying to quietly withdraw the whole thing, the formal invocation of the clause, and a plan for how and when I'd tell them. I decided on my birthday. I know that sounds strange, but my 67th birthday was coming up in 2 weeks, and every year Thomas and Caroline threw me a dinner, or rather I paid for a dinner, and they attended it and called it throwing me one, and I realized that this year they'd absolutely come. Of course they would. They'd come because they'd want to keep up appearances while the conservatorship was pending, want to look like the loving, concerned family, want to keep working on me. They had no idea I knew about the petition, yet the letter had only just arrived and I hadn't responded, hadn't tipped my hand at all. So I would invite them to my birthday dinner, at a restaurant, and I would let them come thinking they were still winning. And then in front of everyone with James Whitmore beside me, I would show them exactly who Evelyn Carter was. The 2 weeks leading up to that dinner were the strangest of my life. I kept painting. I kept seeing Margaret for coffee. I kept living my new life, and it kept getting realer and warmer and more mine. And underneath it all, I was preparing. James and I went over exactly what would be said. I practiced in the mirror not the soft old lady smile this time, but the words, the real words, the ones I'd been swallowing for 3 years. I called Thomas myself to invite them. I made my voice light and warm, and a little tired, the voice of a lonely old woman who missed her family. "Thomas, honey, my birthday's coming up. I know things have been a little strained lately, and I've been thinking I don't want us to be at odds. You're my family. Will you and Caroline come to dinner? I'd love to have everyone together. Sophia, Noah, all of us. Please." And I could hear it in his voice, the relief, the calculation, the sense that the difficult old woman was softening, coming back around, that maybe the pressure was working and she was ready to reconcile, ready to be reasonable, ready, perhaps to reconsider the house after all. "Of course, Mom," he said warmly. "We'd love to. We've missed you. We've been so worried about you, you know that." "I know you have," I said. "I know exactly how worried you've been." I didn't catch it. He couldn't have. "Where would you like to go? We'll set it all up." "I've already booked it," I said. "The lakeside room, 7 o'clock 2 weeks from Saturday. Just come. I'll take care of everything." "I'll take care of everything," The last time, the very last time I'd ever say those words to my son. Noah called me the night before the dinner. He knew. I'd told him the whole plan because I needed one person in that room to know what was coming. One ally, and because I'd promised him no more secrets between us. "Grandma," he said, "are you sure about this? Doing it at your own birthday in front of everyone, are you sure?" "I'm sure, sweetheart." "They're going to lose it, Mom especially. It's going to be ugly." "I know. And you're okay." I looked around my kitchen, at the height marks on the door frame, at the bird feeder outside the window, at the empty chair where I'd sat and talked to Daniel every day for 3 years, and where lately I'd started to feel like maybe he was finally at peace because I finally was. "Noah," I said, "for 3 years I let them make me smaller and smaller. I paid, and I said yes, and I said sorry, and every year there was less of me. And I just kept thinking if I give enough, if I'm good enough, they'll love me. And they never did. Not the way love is supposed to be. So tomorrow isn't ugly, honey. Tomorrow is the day I stop disappearing. That's not ugly. That's the opposite of ugly." He was quiet, and then he said, "Grandpa would be so proud of you." "Hi is," I said. "I can feel it." The night of my birthday, I arrived at the lakeside room early on purpose. James Whitmore was already there, waiting in a good suit with a leather folder tucked under his arm that contained everything. The response to the conservatorship petition, the formal invocation of Daniel's clause, all of it. He stood when he saw me, and he took my hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready," I said, and I meant it. We'd arranged a private room, a nice one with a long table. I sat at the head of it. James sat just off to the side, his folder in front of him, quiet as a stone. And then one by one my family arrived. Sophia came first with her new husband Mark, and she hugged me, and I saw again that flicker of shame in her eyes, that thing she couldn't quite hide. Then Noah, who caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod and took a seat near me on my side of the table, which I noticed and which meant everything to me. And then Thomas and Caroline swept in, all smiles, all warmth, Caroline carrying a gift bag with tissue paper sticking out the top, Thomas with a bottle of wine. "Happy birthday, Mom," he boomed, kissing my cheek. Caroline set the gift bag in front of me and squeezed my shoulders. "Happy birthday, Evelyn. You look wonderful. Doesn't she look wonderful? Everyone's so healthy." So healthy. 2 weeks after signing a document claiming I was in cognitive decline. The nerve of it took my breath away and steadied me at the same time. They sat. We ordered. For the first half of that dinner, I let them have their performance. I let Thomas make toasts and Caroline fuss, and everyone pretend we were a normal, loving family celebrating a birthday. I watched Caroline try twice to steer the conversation gently toward how much easier things would be if I didn't have so much to worry about, testing the waters, probing to see if the pressure had worked, if I was ready to be reasonable about the house. I let her. I let it all play out, because I wanted them relaxed. I wanted them confident. I wanted them absolutely certain they were winning right up until the moment they weren't. And then when the plates were cleared and the waiter had brought coffee, Thomas cleared his throat, and I saw him glance at Caroline, and I knew he was about to make his move. He thought this was the moment. The reconciliation dinner, the softened old woman. He thought he was going to close the deal. "Mom," he said in that gentle, reasonable voice, "I'm really glad we're all together tonight. It means a lot. And I've been thinking maybe this is a good time to talk as a family about some of the things we've been worried about making your life easier, because we love you and—" "Thomas," I said. Something in my voice stopped him, some new note he'd never heard from me before. "Before you go on," I said, and I set down my coffee cup, and I looked around the table at all of them. "I have something I'd like to say. It is my birthday, after all. Will you let an old woman have the floor for a few minutes?" "Of course, Mom," Thomas said, and there was the faintest flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, now the first hint that something wasn't quite going according to his plan. I folded my hands on the table, and I began. "For 3 years, I said, since your father died, I have tried to be the glue that held this family together. I paid for things. I helped. I said yes to nearly everything anyone ever asked of me, and I told myself that was love. I told myself that if I just gave enough, took care of enough, sacrificed enough, that this family would love me back." I paused. "I gave you, Thomas, and you, Caroline, a little over $340,000 over these 3 years. I know the exact number because I finally sat down and added it up." The table had gone very quiet. Caroline's smile had frozen on her face. I paid for the kitchen remodel, the car, the Hawaii trip I wasn't invited to, Sophia's tuition, this whole wedding. I looked at Sophia and I softened just slightly. Which was beautiful, sweetheart, and I don't regret a penny of your part in it. Then I turned back to Thomas and Caroline, and the softness left my voice. And at that wedding, I said, someone made me a name tag in beautiful calligraphy. And do you know what it said? It said, the old lady paying for everything. Caroline's face drained of color. Evelyn, she started, that was just, I'm not finished, I said, and I didn't raise my voice, but something in it silenced her instantly. I have been finished for 3 years, Caroline. Tonight I'm going to finish talking. You can wait your turn. I reached into my purse and I took out the name tag I'd kept it all this time and I laid it on the table where everyone could see it. This, I said, is what my family thinks I am. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not Evelyn, the old lady paying for everything. And for a long time I let that be true because I was afraid that if I stopped paying there'd be nothing left, that you'd have no reason to keep me around. My voice caught just once, and I let it because it was true, and I wasn't going to hide from the truth anymore. So a few months ago, I decided to find out. I stopped paying, and I watched what happened. I looked at Thomas. When I said no to the honeymoon, your first question wasn't whether I was upset. It was whether something was wrong with the money. When I started painting again, when I made a friend, when I began for the first time in 3 years to live, you didn't celebrate that. You called it erratic behavior. You called it cognitive decline. You started telling people your mother was losing her mind. I let that sit for a moment. And then 2 weeks ago, this arrived in my mailbox. I took the letter out of my purse, the petition, and I set it on the table beside the name tag. Thomas went white. Caroline made a small sound, almost a gasp. A petition for conservatorship, I said quietly, filed by my own son and his wife, asking a court to declare me incompetent, to take away my right to manage my own money, my own home, my own medical decisions, my own life, on the grounds of what was the phrase, age-related cognitive decline and unresolved grief. I looked at Thomas, and I let him see everything in my face. You tried to have me erased, Thomas. You looked at your mother who gave you everything, and you tried to have a judge declare that I no longer had a mind worth respecting, so you could take it all. The room was dead silent. Sophia had her hand over her mouth. Mark was staring at the table. Noah sat perfectly still beside me watching his parents. Mom, Thomas said, and his voice cracked. It's not what it looks like. We were worried, we were trying to protect. Please don't, I said, and for the first time my voice was gentle, sad. Please don't lie to me at my own birthday dinner. I've earned better than that. Whatever else is true tonight, I've earned that much. He shut his mouth, and then I turned and I nodded to James Whitmore, and James stood up and he opened his leather folder and every head at that table turned toward this dignified older gentleman they'd never met. This is James Whitmore, I said. He was your father's attorney for 40 years. He was your father's friend, and he has something to explain to all of you. James cleared his throat, and in a calm, clear courtroom voice he explained Daniel's will, the protective clause, the provision my husband had added 8 months before he died, because he had seen somehow, God rest him, he had seen exactly what might one day happen to me. He explained the forfeiture condition. He explained that any descendant who subjected me to financial coercion, public humiliation, or attempts to deprive me of autonomy over my own person or property would lose their entire inheritance. And he explained that the determination was mine to make at my sole discretion, and that my judgment was by the terms of the will final and unchallengeable in any court of law. I watched the understanding move across Thomas's face, and Caroline's like a shadow crossing a field. Slow, then all at once. The name tag, James said quietly, laying it out. Public humiliation, premeditated, witnessed, the $340,000 extracted through repeated emotional pressure using the memory of the deceased as leverage, financial coercion. And this, he touched the petition, an attempt to deprive Mrs. Carter of autonomy over her own person and property, filed with a court signed by both of you. Each one independently satisfies the conditions of the clause. Together they constitute the clearest case I have seen in 40 years of practice. He closed his folder. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, as of today, by Evelyn's decision and under the terms of your father's will, you have forfeited your entire inheritance, every dollar. It will be redistributed among the descendants who did not harm her. This decision is final, And I'll tell you now, so you don't waste your money finding out from another lawyer, it is by the explicit design of the will not subject to challenge in any court. Your father made certain of that. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard. And then Caroline exploded. "You can't do this. This is insane. Thomas, do something, Evelyn. This is exactly what we were worried about. This is exactly the kind of paranoid, irrational..." "Caroline," my voice cut through hers like a blade, "you just tried to have me declared incompetent, and now at the very moment my late husband's careful, deliberate, legally airtight planning is revealed. Your argument is that I'm the one who isn't thinking clearly." I almost laughed. "Do you hear yourself?" She had no answer, because there wasn't one. Thomas hadn't said a word. He was staring at the name tag on the table, and then at the petition, and then at me and his face. I'll be honest with you, his face broke something in me even then. Because underneath the shock and the anger and the dawning horror of what he'd lost, I saw for just a moment a little boy, my little boy, lost and ashamed. "Mom," he whispered, "how could you?" "No," I said, and my voice was steel now. "No, Thomas, you do not get to ask me how I could. Not tonight. You sent a letter to a court asking a judge to take away my mind. So you will sit there and you will listen, because I am going to say the last thing I have to say, and then this dinner is over." I stood up. "You lost the money because of your father's will," I said. "But you lost me long before tonight. You lost me every time you looked at me and saw a bank account instead of your mother. You lost me at that wedding with that name tag. You lost me with every dad would have wanted. You used to pry my heart open. The will just made it official." I picked up the name tag one last time, and I looked at it, and then I set it down. "I am not the old lady paying for everything, not anymore. I am Evelyn Carter. I am a painter. I am a friend. I am a grandmother to a young man who loved me when no one else did. And I am a woman who finally learned that she deserved to be loved for herself and not for her checkbook." I looked at my son one last time. "The money is gone, Thomas. That's your father's decision made years ago, and I won't undo it. But hear me, the door isn't bricked up. Not by me. If you ever someday become a man who can love his mother without a price tag attached, you'll know where to find me. I'll be in the house you tried to sell, painting, living, being myself, and I'll be glad to see you, but you'll come as my son, never again as my creditor." And then I picked up my purse, and I looked around that table one last time at Sophia crying quietly, at Mark frozen in his chair, at Caroline white with fury, at Thomas with his head in his hands, and at Noah, my Noah, looking up at me with tears in his eyes, and something else too, something that looked an awful lot like pride. "Noah," I said, "would you walk your grandmother out?" He stood up immediately. "Yes, ma'am." And with my grandson's arm through mine, and James Whitmore following behind, I walked out of that room, out of that restaurant, and out into the cool night air, and I took the first full breath I had taken in 3 years. The drive home that night was the quietest of my life and the most peaceful. Noah followed me in his own car, insisting he wanted to make sure I got in safe. And when we pulled into my driveway, he came in and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd added up $340,000 of my own foolishness weeks before, and we didn't say much. We didn't need to. He made us both tea, this 24-year-old boy moving around my kitchen like he belonged there, and we sat and drank it. And at one point he reached over and put his hand on top of mine and said, "You did it, Grandma." And I said, "We did it, sweetheart." And that was all. That was enough. I slept that night like I hadn't slept since Daniel died. No dreams, no 2 coffee cups the next morning, just rest. But I won't pretend the days that followed were simple, because they weren't. The heart doesn't work that way. You can do the right thing, the strong thing, the thing you needed to do for your own survival, and still wake up in the middle of the night with an ache in your chest for the child you carried. I'd be lying if I told you I didn't grieve Thomas. I did. I grieved him like a death, because in a way, it was the death of the son I'd believed in, the death of the family I thought I had. Margaret came over that first hard week, and she sat with me while I cried, and she didn't try to fix it or talk me out of it. She just said, "Grieve him, honey, you're allowed, just don't take him back." And I didn't. Caroline didn't grieve. Caroline went to war. 10 days after my birthday dinner, another letter came, this one from a new lawyer, a more expensive-sounding one, threatening to challenge Daniel's will, to challenge the clause, to challenge my competence to have made such a decision under the undue influence of James Whitmore. I read it standing in my driveway in almost the exact spot where I'd read the conservatorship petition, and this time I didn't feel cold or frightened at all. I just felt tired of them. I called James and read it to him over the phone, and he actually chuckled. "Let them try," he said. "Evelyn, I drafted that clause specifically to be challenge-proof at Daniel's insistence. He spent extra money making it airtight. There's a no-contest provision baked right in. Anyone who challenges the will and loses forfeits anything they might otherwise have received. They've already forfeited everything, so they've got nothing left to lose by suing except their own legal fees. And they will lose. I'd stake my 40-year reputation on it." He paused. "But more than that, the conservatorship petition, they withdrew it. Quietly. 2 days ago. Their own lawyer must have finally read Dr. Patel's assessment and told them they were about to get sanctioned for filing a frivolous bad faith petition against a woman of documented sound mind. So the very thing they tried to use to prove you were incompetent has collapsed and made them look like exactly what they are. Let them hire all the lawyers they want, Evelyn. The more they fight, the worse they look. And the more airtight your position becomes." I was right. The challenge went nowhere. It dragged on for a few months, a lot of expensive noise from Caroline's attorneys, and every bit of it broke against the wall Daniel had built for me 40 years into our marriage and 8 months before he died. By spring, it was over. They'd spent thousands fighting a battle they'd lost before they started, and in the end, they walked away with exactly what the will had already given them: nothing. Thomas and Caroline moved away that summer to another state. Closer to Caroline's family, they said, though I suspect the truth was they couldn't stand to be in the same town as the mother-in-law who'd beaten them and the neighbors who'd started to whisper. I heard secondhand that they told people I'd cut them off out of spite, that I'd changed after Daniel died, that grief had turned me bitter. And you know what? For a little while that stung. It stung to know my own son was out there telling people I was the villain in my own story. But then Margaret said the thing that finally set me free of it. We were at coffee after painting class, and I told her how much it bothered me, the lies they were spreading, and she set down her cup and looked at me and said, "Evelyn, people who tell the truth don't need you to agree with their version. Only liars need that. Let them tell their story. You know what really happened? Daniel knew. Noah knows. God knows. That's a bigger jury than a few gossips in a town you don't even have to live near." And she was right. I let it go. I let them go. Not all at once. Grief doesn't work like a light switch, I've learned that too, but a little more each day, until one morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Thomas and Caroline in a week, and the not thinking didn't hurt anymore, because I had so much else to think about. That's the part nobody tells you. When you finally stop pouring your whole self into people who only take, you're left holding all this life, this energy, this love that you'd forgotten you had, and you get to decide where it goes. I put mine everywhere. I kept painting. By that fall, I'd filled the old sewing room with canvases, and Ruth, my teacher, pulled me aside one day and asked if I'd ever consider showing my work. Showing it. Me. And I laughed and said no, absolutely not, and then I went home and thought about Daniel, who never once let me talk myself out of something I was afraid of, and I called Ruth back and said yes. My paintings hung in a little group show at the community center that winter, 14 of them. I stood in that room in a nice dress, not the navy one, a new one, a deep emerald green, I bought just for myself, and I watched strangers look at things I'd made with my own hands, and one woman I'd never met stood in front of my painting of a cardinal at a bird feeder for a long, long time, and then she found me and asked if it was for sale, because it reminded her of her late husband, who used to fill the feeders every morning. I gave it to her. I wouldn't take a dime. I told her Daniel used to fill our feeders too, and she took my hands and we both cried a little. 2 widows in a community center, and I want to tell you that was worth more to me than all $340,000 put together, because I'd made something that reached into a stranger's grief and comforted it. I hadn't paid for that. I'd created it. There's all the difference in the world. And Noah, oh my Noah. Do you remember I told you my grandson dreamed of opening a bookstore? He'd mentioned it once years ago, shyly, the way young people mention dreams they've already half-talked themselves out of. Well, after everything settled, after the inheritance was redistributed, and yes, Noah received a share, and Sophia too. Though I'll come back to Sophia. Noah came to me one evening and he sat at my kitchen table and he said, "Grandma, I've been thinking about doing something a little crazy." And I said, "Tell me." And he told me. The bookstore. A real one, a little storefront downtown that had come up for lease with big windows and room for a coffee counter and shelves of stories. He'd run the numbers 100 times. He was terrified. He was so sure I'd tell him he was being foolish. Instead, I said, "When do we sign the lease?" His head came up. "I'm not giving you the money, Noah," I said, and I watched his face and I chose my words carefully because this mattered more than almost anything I'd say to him. "I learned my lesson about giving money. I'm going to invest in you. There's a difference, and it's the most important difference in the world. Giving is when I hand it over and hope you love me for it. Investing is when I believe in you, and I put something real behind that belief, and I expect you to work like hell and make it real, and whether it succeeds or fails, I'll still love you exactly the same, because my love was never the money in the first place. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He understood. I watched him understand, and he did work like hell. That's the thing about Noah, he never took a single dollar for granted. Not one, because he was the only one who'd never seen me as a source of dollars in the first place. The bookstore opened the following year. He named it Daniel's after his grandfather without telling me so, that the first time I saw the sign go up over the door, I had to sit down on the curb and put my head in my hands. And on the big wall behind the coffee counter in the best light in the whole store, he hung one of my paintings, the biggest one I'd ever done. A field of wildflowers under an enormous sky painted in every color I'd been too afraid to use for 40 years. I stood in that bookstore on opening day, surrounded by warm light and the smell of coffee and books, and my own grandson greeting customers by name. And I looked up at my painting on the wall, and I felt Daniel there. I felt him so strongly, and I whispered just for me, "We did all right, didn't we, old man? In the end, we did all right." Now, I promised I'd come back to Sophia, and I will, because her part of this taught me something about mercy that I want you to have. For a long time after the birthday dinner, Sophia stayed away. She was caught, I understood, caught between her grandmother and her parents, and she'd chosen by staying silent to go along with them. But about a year after everything, she showed up at Daniel's the bookstore on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when it was just me minding the counter for Noah. She came in and she stood there and she couldn't get a word out, and then she just started to cry. "Grandma," she said, "I knew about the name tag. I saw it before the reception even started. Mom showed it to me and thought it was funny, and I laughed. I laughed, Grandma. And then I saw your face when you found it, and I've hated myself every single day since, and I was too much of a coward to say anything because I didn't want Mom and Dad angry at me, and I am so, so sorry." And here's where the story could have ended, one of two ways, and I want you to notice which one I chose because it's the whole point of everything I've learned. I could have been hard. God knows she'd earned a little hardness. She'd laughed at that name tag. She'd stayed silent when it counted. But I looked at this young woman, this granddaughter of mine, standing in my grandson's bookstore, sobbing and honest and finally telling the truth. And I understood that she was doing the one thing her parents never had and never would. She was taking responsibility. She was choosing me over her own comfort a year too late, but choosing me all the same. So I came around that counter and I took my granddaughter in my arms and I held her while she cried. "I forgive you," I said. "I forgive you, sweetheart, but I need you to hear something and I need you to carry it with you for the rest of your life." I held her back so I could look at her face. Love without respect is not love. Do you understand me? It's just need wearing love's clothes. Your parents needed me. They never respected me. And you're going to meet a lot of people in this life who need you, who need what you can do for them, what you can give them, how you can make them feel. And the only question that will ever matter, the only one, is whether they respect you when you stop being useful. That's the test. That's the whole test. You remember your grandmother taught you that. She nodded against my shoulder and she never forgot it. She's a different woman now than the girl who laughed at that name tag. She comes to Sunday dinner, she brings her children. She calls me just to talk. And not once, not one single time in all the years since, has she ever asked me for a dime. And that's how I know it's real. Because that's the thing I finally learned, the thing that cost me a marriage's worth of savings and 3 years of my dignity and a son to learn. You can't buy love and you can't earn it by paying for things. And any love that has a price tag was never love at all. Real love is free. Real love shows up on a quiet Tuesday to say sorry. Real love hangs your painting on the best wall in the store. Real love names the bookstore after the man who protected you. Thomas never came back. I want to be honest about that because I don't believe in fairy tale endings and I won't insult you with one. I left the door open. I meant it when I said it at that dinner, and I mean it still. If my son ever became a man who could love me without a price attached, he'd be welcome at my table tomorrow. But he never chose to walk through it. A few times over the years, I heard from him always around the holidays, always a little too warm, and always eventually circling back to money, to how hard things have been, to whether I might reconsider. And every time I said no, gently but completely, and every time he stopped calling the moment he understood the answer hadn't changed. And that right there is the saddest confirmation a mother could ever receive, and also the clearest. He didn't want his mother. He'd only ever wanted her checkbook. I know that now, all the way down to the bottom, and while it will always ache, it no longer breaks me. Because you cannot lose what you never truly had. I didn't lose my son at that birthday dinner. I only lost the illusion that I'd had one. And illusions, however beautiful, are not worth your whole life. James Whitmore and I stayed close until the end of his days. He passed 2 years ago, and I sat at his funeral in the front row where I belonged, and I thanked him silently for being the hands that carried out my husband's love. Ruth still teaches the painting class, and I still go every Tuesday and Thursday, and I'm one of the old-timers now, the one who tells the nervous newcomers, there are no mistakes in art, only happy discoveries. Margaret and I take a trip together every year. We've seen the Grand Canyon, the coast of Maine, the redwoods that made us both feel small in the best possible way. And Noah's bookstore is thriving, and my paintings sell now, and I give the money to the women's shelter across town because I've got everything I need and then some. I'm 70 years old now as I sit here telling you this. 4 years since a young woman in a black vest handed me a name tag that called me the old lady paying for everything. And I've thought a great deal in those 4 years about that name tag, which I still keep not in a drawer of shame anymore, but framed on the wall of my bedroom, right next to a photograph of Daniel. People ask me why on earth I'd frame the cruelest thing anyone ever did to me. And here's what I tell them. Because that name tag saved my life. If Caroline had never written those words, I might have gone on paying and disappearing a little less of me every year until there was nothing left but a checkbook and a smile. That name tag was the cruelest thing that ever happened to me, and it was also the greatest gift I was ever given because it finally made me look. It made me see. It told me the truth. My whole family had been too polite to say out loud and too dishonest to live by that they had reduced me to what I could give them. And once I saw that truth, I could never unsee it. And once I could never unsee it, I had no choice but to become someone new. Someone whole, someone who paints and travels and forgives the ones who earn it and holds the line against the ones who don't. Someone who learned at 66 years old that it is never ever too late to stop disappearing and start living. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was married to a good man for 42 years who loved me enough to protect me even from beyond the grave. I raised a son who broke my heart, and I found a grandson who healed it. I gave away $340,000 trying to buy a love that was never for sale, and then I gave away my fear, which was the only thing that had ever really been holding me back. I am not the old lady paying for everything. I never was. I am Evelyn Carter, a mother, a grandmother, a painter, a woman, and I am at long last, and for the rest of my days entirely and unapologetically my own.